You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host, and this is the second of a two-part interview with a woman who is having a wide-ranging career intersecting with service to society. In her early life, she was stationed abroad as her father worked in several countries as a foreign service officer. She grew to be an artist and a historian, and even worked in a wastewater treatment facility in her now hometown area, York, Pennsylvania. Her husband happens to be the elected governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and she is none other than Frances Donnelly Wolfe. We're going to talk to Frances in this episode about her life of service as an artist, and we're going to be discovering her interest in art serving society. We'll also get into her work as a volunteer in her local community and discuss various concerns about women incarcerated. And we'll find out that Frances is quite the advocate for women who have been incarcerated. I hope you'll also tune in to our first episode where we discussed much of Frances's early life, as well as her orientation to supporting causes that promote educational opportunity for people who have been somewhat excluded from those opportunities. So I hope you'll tune into that one.
So tell us, Frances, how you got inspired to explore your artistic talent. Where did that come from? And I would suspect it has some influence over maybe where you lend your volunteerism and support as well.
Well, it's something that I've always done. I mean, for as long as I can remember. My parents, being really good parents, kept a lot of my drawings. And, from the time I was, maybe 3 or something, sort of little pencil drawings. And, I came across them after they passed away. But I think, if I was going to sort of analyze myself, I think it was a way with all the moving and, different schools and different friends and different experiences. For me, to make a world of my own in drawing and painting was a place of comfort and safety. It was under my control. So, I started out that way. And, I continued all the way through school. I do remember when I was ready for college, I didn't know, I was thinking of going to art school, but I didn't know what I had to say with it. So I put it aside and went to university and studied history, which I loved. But, and then went on to do other jobs. I worked in a publishing firm in Boston. And then I became a regional planner here in York and worked with water distribution systems and wastewater systems, which was, just wonderful work. I adored it. But the art part still was there. In the doing of art, it helped me make an understanding in a way of the world, to put my stamp on the world that I knew. And I still have, I've kept all the pieces from when I was a child, to now. I can see some theme of making images of where we lived. And it's interesting to see what impressed me at the time. But it was good to, to study history generally, but then to come back to Franklin Marshall and then on to Bryn Mawr to do graduate work in history of art, to think of it beyond, what I could glean around in my world. It's just really stretched me to see, how do other people, current practitioners as well as artists of the past, how did they deal with the same kind of issue or curiosity or or problem. One of the things is when I went on to Bryn Mawr to do a master's in history of art, my thesis was on three men who were at the court of Philip IV, I think it was. And they were three men who were dwarfed, and they were considered the other. They were considered outsiders. They were considered accoutrements. They were considered things you collect. And the idea of, the research was fascinating. The research broke my heart. But the research also showed me that maybe I thought myself that way in going, in visiting, in living in all these places, because I knew, and the people who lived there knew, that I didn't come from there. I didn't look like them. And it was an interesting way to start writing this story, this thesis. It made me reflect on, my pathway. It was rich. I wouldn't, have changed it for the world. But it was a very reflective period for me to make an understanding. Were they portraits or were they still life paintings? And I think I did make the argument that they were still life paintings. The way you would collect a cup, pieces of fruits, a bowl. These three men were very much that. So this art, this making and this writing about it, of art, of images, for me, it's a very internal, very reflective process. I know when I'm finished with a piece, I feel very, I'm spent. There's nothing else I can give to that piece. And it's just something intangible. And I just have to, let go. And that way I'm giving it my all, even if the piece is very small. And I think, perhaps for all of us, whatever we do, if it's going to be done well, we have to feel that we've given it all. It's an important part of my life. In a way, it's what I do. It's a way of making an understanding of my place at any particular time of what's going on.
Well, it does make me think, though, Frances, about the challenges that the art community is having right now with the pandemic. And usually people will begin to immediately turn their philanthropic orientation to the people that you talked about previously, the folk who are hungry, the folk who are food insecure, people who are lacking, these immediate needs that we talk about, just what it takes to survive the moment kinds of needs. It does strike me too, though, that art plays a role in helping us express this challenge and this pain that people experience in very different ways, and that we have to find ways while we're supporting people who are in pain to continue to encourage the artist to create that expression. Because as you say, it helps us understand the life that we're living in, and understanding that life certainly gives us meaning. And we all need meaning, particularly in different moments.
I absolutely agree. I follow different artists on Instagram now, people who I've never heard of before. But it's easy to go down a rabbit hole in that. So you find different people. But I follow ballet dancers. I follow some musicians, some sculptors, painters, absolutely. People who sketch, even potters, people who make things. And they're all, I follow some galleries, and they have online art exhibitions. I'm fascinated by musicians, of groups of musicians coming together in each in their own space, but converging to compose, to present a piece. And the music is magnificent, and they don't even have to be in the same country. They've all come from all over. There's some Broadway appeals of groups coming together, of individuals coming together, singing, the old standard Broadway tunes. It's a fundraising enterprise, but it is so much fun to listen to. And so you see people continuing to be creative. And I find that exciting. I find that really, really, really exciting. I think there are other sort of creative acts like chefs, restaurants that are really hurting. But so many of them are being creative of, making food that we can all bring home, or making food that they can deliver to us, making food that they can give to food banks. For example, the chef, Jose Andres in DC, he has a huge kitchen getting ready, getting food out for people in need, but really, really, really good food. The rest of us can only dream. I think that's something exciting. So there are different ways people are still creating on a smaller scale, but again, that impulse is there. I don't know when we all come back to whatever the normal is going to be, and we will come back to something, but I don't know how the creative world, I don't know how it will be changed. It will be changed. I do know that. But I don't know. I think, if I'm going to be optimistic, I think maybe some new avenues of being creative have opened up for us in ways we hadn't thought about before. So, to be able to, just pull up a concert, to be able to pull up a ballet performance, or a gallery having, their show on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. Perhaps in a way, this enterprise will help us become more democratic, small d, because they'll have the capacity to share their message, to share their images, to share their singing to a wider audience. Maybe that is something that it's not just for the select few, but it's out there for the rest of us.
Let me talk to you a bit about your individual philanthropy. One of the questions that I like to ask my guests is, how do they go about deciding which organizations to support? I mean, you have a cause that you're interested in, but now within that cause, there are probably always lots of organizations that you could choose to give your money to, or to volunteer your time for that matter. What are some of the influences or factors that go into driving the wolves to make a gift or to invest their time? What are some of the things that go into that calculus for you all?
Tom and I have, spent a lot of time in New York, and we've come to know people and organizations and institutions in New York. And because of that familiarity, we're able to see where the need is at any given time. I'd say that we've supported many, many, many institutions in New York and many organizations. We've also been very strong supporters of United Way and very strong supporters of our community foundation. And in fact, at different times, Tom and I have been on the boards of these organizations. I think between us and the rest of Tom's family, there hasn't been an organization that hasn't been touched by at least one of us. And because I think as sort of as a unit, we've all contributed together to these organizations. But I think for here, the sort of the North Star of giving was what would help York the most at this point in time. And at different times, but we've been, strong supporters of the library. Again, that's part of in terms of education. We've been very, very, very strong supporters of our local JCC. Also very strong supporters of our local Crispus Attucks organization. And it's run by just a wonderful director who's been there for many, many years. And York College, for example. We've been very strong supporters of each of our educational institutions that we've graduated from. Our local school, the public schools our daughters, have gone to here. Looking at need, looking at the community as a whole, what would benefit, what would strengthen it, what would encourage participation. In a way, it's easy because we live here, so we know in that respect. And we've kept a lot of it are giving local, I'm going to say local, regional. And it's been fun. We've learned a lot about the community. I've learned a lot, being on our local community foundation board. And I was on the distribution committee for a long time. And I've learned so much about the programs that these different organizations do or present, but also how much they're needed. And, what are the criteria they think about how to give their funds, how to distribute them. It's all intertwined. It's not discrete. We're part of the community. We've worked with part of the system of learning how to distribute the monies and support effectively. It's all worked out. It's worked out well.
Francis, some people look at giving as a sacrifice, or volunteering their time as a sacrifice. And maybe to some extent it is. But you mentioned something a minute ago that I want to explore, which was that you got so much out of it. You learned so much. How do we pass that understanding on to people who may be on the fence about giving? I mean, giving isn't, at a base level, it's not a logical thing to do. It's not logical to take something that you have and simply give it away, something that you worked hard for, and give it to someone else. But there are benefits to that, aren't there?
There are, but I don't look at it as us and them, whether them are people or organizations or institutions, because we are them. Mm. All of us have been beneficiaries of all kinds of organizations. We've been helped in so many ways, of libraries, of hospitals, of schools and colleges, art institutions, museums, theaters, maybe some nonprofits. We've all been helped in different ways. We've taken advantage. We've used all of these institutions and organizations in different ways at different times in our lives. So we're giving to us. So unless I'm sacrificing for myself, that's how we want to put it, we're helping ourselves by helping someone else. There was a graduation speaker who said, when someone is a student and they're a waiter or waitress, always tip them well, because you never know when that person is going to be a physician, and they just might be operating on you at some point. The thinking that I think Tom and I have, there isn't a separation. It's not even a fabric. I mean, it's what makes up our life. It's what makes up your life. We're all in this together. So I don't think we see it as, one volunteers. I was on the county planning commission for York County for a time. It was wonderful, great fun. And, once a month, we would have these late night, these very long meetings. And then the work involved beforehand to read all of the plans that are being proposed. So I could look at that as saying that I was sacrificing my time and my, reading time before that, my, doing homework for it. When we all got there together and made decisions, we were talking about the community we live in. It was our community. It wasn't someone's plan out there. That plan was going to affect how I drove around the place or lived, or, what were the repercussions. It affected us. It affected all of us. So there isn't, I don't see it as, and I don't think Tom does either, see it as a separate, that we're in one corner, and another organization's in another corner. We affect each other. We're interdependent. We've all been beneficiaries of each other. So the next step is we roll up our sleeves and help each other.
Francis, I also have learned from speaking with you recently that you have a big concern and focus on incarcerated women. And I'd like to ask you how that came about, and what is your vision for trying to help and support incarcerated women? I know a lot of people might look at that and say, why in the world would somebody want to support people in prison? They deserve to be there, so to speak.
Yes.
How do you see it? Why should they see it differently?
Well, a long time ago in New York. Another one of the organizations that I was involved with was an organization called Atkins House. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was an organization a private organization that contracted with the state it was a halfway house for female offenders. And it was small. My memory says maybe 10 women would come in, and they would stay, from 6 months to a year maybe. They would have a job and the kinds of programs that would help them, because each woman coming in had different needs. So we would have different programs directed to them, to get them through and prepared for the world at large. The vast majority of them were there on drug-related issues, either buying, selling, trying to make their way through all of that. And most of them had children. So there was that. Then I rotated off the board after many years. But it was always something that I kept with me, because what struck me, we would have dinners with the residents, talk about how they got to where they are. And most of them had families. Most of them were people just like you and me, who grew up, who had their own lives. They didn't stand a chance. And to ask them to be stronger than strong with an upbringing or social settings that were really unhealthy in all kinds of ways. And, in a way, there but for the grace of God go I. I mean, we are some of the luckiest people in the world because of the kinds of families and friends we have around us. And by awful luck, these women didn't have that. So that's just something that stayed with me. When Tom started talking about talking about criminal justice reform with Van Jones, and they've been working on things together, and others as well. So much of the conversation, or I'd see them on a panel, they'd be talking about prison and prison reform. I said, but how does that relate to what women go through? And at that time, I also visited a women's prison in Pennsylvania called Muncie. In talking with the people who are there, they said, and I'm going to get the percentages wrong specifically, but the magnitude, the relative relationship is pretty close. They said something like, let's say, 74% of the women in Muncie are parents, and that 79% of the women at Muncie are taking medication for mental health needs. To me, the convergence of those two numbers, it was almost like they were matched. And so I was thinking about women who have mental health needs, who are parents. What happens to them when they get out? Who's there for them? Another thing that the officials at Muncie said, that there's evidence to this, that when men come out of prison, they have a girlfriend, they have a sister, a mother, an aunt who will take them in, make the meals, help them get a job. There's a very strong support network. But with women, when they come out, they're handed back their children, they say, sort of like, okay, we'll see you around. So my question was, what happens when you're emotionally, you're trying to find your way, and you still have to be a strong role model for the children you have, and you have to find a job, and you have to find a place to live. How do you do that? So right now I was in the middle of educating myself about this, of the programs that the state has and what they're starting to do. And then the virus hits, sort of starting back up again. But to see how we can help mothers and children make their way through this world, because, the vast majority of mothers are given their children, have custody of their children. But we don't want the children to repeat the mistakes. We want the unit to be whole. We want the unit to be strong. And how can we do that? How can we better serve them? And that's my question. And that will guide me into seeing and trying to promote. I'm not trying to create something new. I'm trying here at the service of the professionals in the criminal justice system in Pennsylvania. How can I show off? How can I be the ambassador to programs that will help women, that you can show off, that you're proud of, that we all should know about, and so that the rest of us can help as well. So that's, a very long answer to your question. It's, something that has stayed with me for many, many years. And I certainly, I didn't have any experience prior to that with the criminal justice system. I never knew anyone who was in prison. I never knew what it was about or, anything like that. So this has been an education, and I'm learning at the feet of the professionals. I'm learning at the feet of people who have been part of the system. I had dinner with a woman in Harrisburg who has started a bit of a halfway house, and her son, who's an adult now, is part of that. And his mother was not around for a lot of his growing up years. And here he is in the system, but in a way that's to help others transition to the world at large. And I take my mark from them.
Frances, I have to tell you that what you just described is probably the heart of giving. It is having an exposure to something that sticks out like a sore thumb or like a festering sore, if you would, and having it impact you and move you to try to address it so that the problem doesn't become so pervasive that it consumes everything. You wanting to get involved in a material way, in a significant way, is the heart of giving. This is not something that you grew up with. It's not something that you had a lot of exposure to. But once you did get exposed, you were affected by it. And I think that is what we're trying to help people who listen to this podcast appreciate, that we're all in this together. And it doesn't matter what you went through. It matters what you can do to help others who are going through something. And I just want to thank you for sharing that, because it's so important that we understand just that. And with that, Frances, I think we'll end the interview. And I just want to thank you so much for your willingness to share your time and your history and your instincts and your service-oriented heart with our listeners today. And I want to also encourage our listeners to come back and be with us on our next episode. This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by the BBB's Wise Giving Alliance. And thank you for listening.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. Send your comments and ideas to nona@thusmarket.com. That's nona@thusmarket.com. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.